Good morning from Mianj in Brisbane, or good afternoon for you, those of you connecting from New Zealand. Queensland Museum is obviously continuing on with our reconciliation action plan, and we obviously would like to pay our respects to the Turrbal and Yagara peoples on the land that we work and acknowledge their connections to land, water and community. I'm going to talk today about topic records in learning resources in Vernon browser. So we've had this little project on the go this last year, and it sprung out of a redevelopment of our website. So for a number of years now, we've decided that we needed our website overhauled. That actually happened last year, the website redev, and it was launched in January of this year. So what we did is we consolidated 4 different campus websites. So that's the main campus website, South Bank, Brisbane, Museum of Tropical Queensland in Townsville, the Workshops Railway Museum at Ipswich, and Cobb & Co Museum at Toowoomba, and bring all those microsites into one coordinated website, and then improve our ticketing and donation, and make our website a whole lot more accessible for people who might have disabilities such as blindness or hearing impairment, so that they can also appreciate the content on our site. So this is what the website formerly looked like back in 2002 and earlier. It was built in Sitecore 7 and it was hosted on-premise. We've been moving more and more of our servers and systems into the cloud, and this was also the case with our website. So it was upgraded to Sitecore 10 by a web development group called ASIC, and now that's out in the cloud. And interestingly, Rowan's talk about Hamilton City Council, Queensland Museum is another Vernon user that's moved to remote desktop. In our situation, we're using a third party called Codify here locally in Brisbane, but they're probably using the same Microsoft Azure data center in Sydney. So this is what the new website looks like. As I said, built in Sitecore 10, it's hosted in the cloud. It's a whole lot more scalable, so it renders well on a variety of devices, which is important considering probably about half or more of our traffic is coming in via mobile devices now to look at the website. There was a lot of content on this website to move across, and interestingly, one of the most popular parts of the Queensland Museum website was this little section called Animals of Queensland. It had about 600 different fact sheets for all these different species that you might encounter if you're in Queensland. Unfortunately, the content was quite dated. It was in need of review. A lot of the images were low resolution. In some cases, there were just descriptions that had no images at all. They weren't our images, that kind of thing. There wasn't a great deal of resource within the web team to move all this content across to Vernon. But knowing that, I still made the suggestion and signed myself up for work of trying to build this content. And the selling point was essentially that if we put it into Vernon, then the curators and collection managers could actually administer that content, which they were the technical experts in, and publish it themselves without having to go through multiple layers of approvals through graphics, web team and the like to get it online. This is what the old Animals of Queensland site used to look like in the museum website. You'd drill down through those various tiles and you'd come to a particular species fact sheet. For example, this one about the Pacific clown anemone shrimp. It had a small image. Usually they're only about 400 pixels on the long edge, so there wasn't a whole lot of detail. In this case, it was a borrowed image as well. It wasn't one of our own images. So we looked to port all that information across to the new Vernon browser, or Vernon CMS, I should say first, and then out to Vernon browser, and then improve the digital assets that we were making available at the same time. So this is what a Vernon browser equivalent of this species fact sheet looks like. I'll put the link there if you want to have a look in your own time. So the great thing is that now when people come and search collections online for QM, they'll get not only objects, but they'll get topic files coming up for their search results as well. Much bigger image files, so we're using the full capabilities of Vernon and Vernon browser, so maximum of 2000 pixels on the long edge, so can fill a screen quite nicely. And We've even got some markdown happening in our image captions, which is must thank Vernon Systems for all their hard work on helping us out with that configuration of Vernon browser to achieve these seemingly insignificant but very important things to curators and collection managers when communicating scientific names on the web. That's what it looks like in a mobile device, so I think it looks really great on mobile. The other thing that ASIC did is they used our API to pull data into what we call our learning resources section of our website. So the data is actually all accessible from within the museum domain without actually having to go across to collections online. So you can discover this information without even leaving the Queensland Museum website, and the index searching will go across that Vernon content. I should also point out that we're not just doing topics about particular species, we're doing topics about topics as well. So this is an example where we've got garden butterflies, and in this case, you notice there's some arrows indicating we've got a carousel of different images. And then what we've done is we've put a bunch of different linked fact sheets together under one topic. And then you can drill down and you can look at these specific butterfly pages. What does it look like in Vernon CMS itself? So essentially we're using basically 4 different fields is where we're deriving our main data from. It'll be the name, the summary abstract field, the description, and then the subject category fields. So the summary abstract forms the main content on the list view, label view, and lightbox view modes. And then the name is obviously the title for that topic and forms part of the URL as well. The description field is the core content, and that's on the details page of the topic itself. And you notice in there, you might see that we're using some markdown, and that's a way that we've actually applied headings, bold italics to the scientific name, and then we've got some bold on the different subheadings within that topic as well. And then we're just drawing off subject categories, taking the lowest term in that hierarchy and putting it onto that topic file as well, so that when you just look at the topics page itself, you'll get a filtering showing how many crustaceans there are, how many mollusks there are, insects, spiders, so on. Now, I've got a few controls overlaid on these topics so that they don't just get published willy-nilly. So they need a status of approved. They need to be within our website hierarchy. So we're not currently publishing any didactics or exhibition content per se. And then we have a management flag as well, that it's actually got a published flag against it. Once it ticks all those boxes, then Web Messenger will pick it up and push it through to the Vernon browser. So we're just using a bunch of symbolics in the background to determine whether it meets those checks and whether it can be published or not. And of course, the AV needs full public access flag on it as well before it gets published. I mentioned that we use Markdown, so there's an example of the Markdown we used. So when we were working through this with ASIC in terms of setting up for integration into the learning resources, we were using heading 1 tags at one point, but then they recommended that we drop that down to heading 2 so that we didn't conflict with the broader site core CSS setup that they had enabled on their part of the site. So we've just tweaked that slightly on all of our topics. And then the rest is purely aesthetics. I just kind of really like, because you probably don't need bold as well as a heading, but I just kind of liked the look. It made it look a little bit more bold, if that makes sense. So I just tweaked it a bit more. And then this is an example of the Vernon browser output that ASIC was coming in to pick up and integrate into learning resources. So it was really handy from our perspective to work in tandem with them to be able to see what they were seeing and troubleshoot and point out which bits we wanted them to extract and how we wanted that presented. And so the way that we did that, we put in a Google Chrome extension called mod header, and that allowed us to be able to view our own API without errors and look at the content and then work with them to say, this is what we want you to extract, this is what we want the title to be and the content, and so on and so forth. And we did some further tweaking in that we said, we only really want you to harvest content from Vernon browser if it has an image. Just leave everything else alone, because we think that's our best content. And that gave them a good way of filtering a lot of that ancillary information out to make learning resources a bit more streamlined and exciting for the end user who's coming in to view it. So how it started and how's it going? So there's 427 fact sheets just in Animals of Queensland, and so far we've got 196 of those published into Vernon browser. 72 mollusks, 69 crustaceans, 30 reptiles, 13 insects, and 4 spider fact sheets. Unfortunately, we don't have any of our warm and fuzzy, so no mammals. We don't have any birds at the moment either. So those are ones that I'm interested to try and pursue as well. There's been a diversity of interest from curators and collection managers about getting involved and getting their fact sheets on to Vernon browser. It really came to the crunch when we made that transition in January. So when the old website was turned off and collection managers, curators suddenly noticed that their content was no longer accessible, that spurred a great sort of rush to try and get a lot of these mollusks and crustaceans published, which was great, but there's still plenty of work to be done there. Is anyone looking at these topics? Well, interestingly, they are, and the Google Analytics show that, for example, in our last report that we ran for September this year, jumping spider and brown snake were actually in the top 10 of our hits in terms of content pages that people were looking at. And then in terms of what's happening going forward, I've really tried to promote this to cultures and histories as well, because they also had social history information and cultural history information on the old website, which didn't all come across to the new website. And they've gone off by themselves and they've started to build some of these collection descriptions. So you can see an example here where they're building a collection description about compasses, and you can see in the background they're going to link a number of object records for particular compass records so that browsers can go from the topic to the particular objects in the collection. So I think that's a really neat way for collection managers and curators to communicate about groups of interesting collection items at one time and link them together. And the other thing that we're quite interested in is a new pocket guide that will be coming out hopefully sometime this year. It's in work in progress, and it'll be something like this one you see here for backyard insects of Brisbane, but instead it'll be a dragonfly guide, a guide to dragonflies and damselflies of Queensland. And Chris Burwell, who's working on this pocket guide with our editor, Bronwyn, is particularly interested in the fact that Vernon browser can actually support all sorts of interesting additional data that we can't cram into the pocket guide, because obviously we want it to fit in people's pockets. So it wouldn't be called a pocket guide if we put every image and every ounce of content we had in it. But if we can have QR codes in the book and people can go across to Vernon browser and browse additional content, I think that'd be a really great way to boost and augment those little pocket guides. So that's about it from me. If there's any questions or you would like to know more, here's my email address. And thank you so much for your time and inviting me to speak today.
Thank you so much, Dean. Really interesting to see all of that work. The website consolidation, moving multiple websites to one big project, and also the goals of being more accessible. It's really great. So what's the feedback from users or fellow staff been at Queensland Museum on the new site?
What I mentioned, there's that kind of diversity of interest levels in what Vernon browser can do. So social history, for example, are really interested in it. There's nothing published yet, but as I showed, they do have records on the go, which I should add, they've done all by themselves. I've been helping out biodiversity staff a lot more with publishing of their content, because I would say they're probably perhaps not as Vernon savvy as our social history users are with Vernon. Yeah, but there's definitely interest out there, and I hope that will grow. Certainly there is interest from the publishing section, our editor, our senior editor, for example, and because a lot of our books that we publish are full of these species descriptions, and we do see it as a way in that we can provide this content both digitally and in traditional print at the same time for different user bases.
So that pocket guide, is that using data that's come from Vernon CMS?
No, the pocket guide will be based on information provided by the curator to our editors, but that same content we will load as topic records at the same time. Yeah.
And what have you found to be the most satisfying part of the project?
I think that slide I showed before that that people are actually looking at these topics because whenever I would load up those Google Analytics, it was always our rolling stock, large locomotive records that would always be the most prominently looked at objects. So to see some of those actually being replaced by some of these topics as content that people are searching and looking at on collections online was really quite validating to see that it was worth that effort to bring it across into Vernon Browser.
Yeah, and the
And
images.
just I guess just the fact that if we didn't do that, the content presumably might just still not be there because of the resource to get it over into the new site core. That's right.
And so what's next?
What's next? Yeah, continuing to work through that 600 list of fact sheets to get them loaded into Vernon CMS itself, and then run those through a review process with the relevant collection managers and curators to see that they can approve and update those before we release those to the web.